that is one of the biggest red flags I see of how did you get here? Like, I'm reading this essay and I've read other essays and I've looked at your resume and I've looked at your transcript and I know what classes you took and I know what major you've said that you're interested in. None of these things make sense to me. Like, I can't connect any of the dots, and I should be able to connect the dots.
Hello, everyone. Today I am joined by the wonderful Nick Havey from Quad Education. We're here to discuss how to write, how to begin a college application. We'll go over some of the basics. We'll talk a little bit about some red flags, some green lights. But before we begin, Nick, do you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name's Nick Havey. I'm a senior admissions consultant with Quad Education Group. And when I'm not doing that, I also am the director of institutional research at the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. So my day job is also researching admissions, particular to nursing. But I'm excited to be here with Kevin.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. So I guess we'll just jump right into it. I think that one thing a lot of students have been searching for and want to know is how do you even begin, or how do you start approaching the college application process? I think I'm keeping in mind that a lot of these guys are just wrapping up junior year, junior spring, brutal time for students all across the world. Yeah, but once you guys finish that testing, you can start doing a little bit of research. But yeah, how would students begin or get started?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two paths. It's if you know what you want to do and if you don't know what you want to do. You know, for the folks that do know what they want to do, I think the easiest way to start is by thinking about what your major is and then thinking about what you want to get out of that major, whether it be internships, practical experience. Let's say you're pre-med, are you looking at schools that have a med school? Are you looking at schools that have a hospital? Really just starting to narrow down what is important to you when it comes to the actual educational experience, but then also building in the what else do you want out of college. So I went to a big school with Greek life and sports and, intramurals in a large city. And that was important to me because I went to a huge high school. And so a small liberal arts school with less students than my graduating class was going to feel weird.
I just want to echo what Nick just said, because I feel like a lot of students struggle with figuring out what they want. So to help you get started, again, just listing some of those pretty straightforward factors. Like some students choose schools purely based on geography. Right. Some choose based on size. Some care about major more than anything. If you know your professional goals, some students know that they want to pursue med school after or become a professor or just work in the industry straight out of college, then those things are really good to know. The more you can understand that about yourself, then the easier the process is going to be. But that being said, if you don't know, I guess the question is, how do you start figuring that out? Like what research could you do? What would be a good way to begin for the students who really don't know? Maybe they don't even know their major. Like how would a student go about figuring that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like a cliche, but even just thinking about the people that you look up to and looking at what they did, you don't have to recreate their, let's say, dentist. How did they get to dental school? How did they get to their practice? Where did they go? Even just talking to the people in your lives can be a great way to kind of suss out what's exciting to you. And then also one thing that I always ask my students is like, what do you spend your time on right now? I have a lot of, boy juniors who are like, well, I go to the gym every day. Like going to the gym is really important to me. Maybe you want to look at a college that has like a top ranked fitness center. Like that was a huge draw of everywhere I went to college was, well, there's a bouldering gym or there's a Olympic sized swimming pool.
Totally. I think that with the fitness point, that's really fascinating too, because you can also think about academic topics or majors that are related to your interests. So for instance, maybe in high school, they don't have like a sports science program, but some colleges do have a sports science program, a physical therapy, where you're really interested in learning more about that. I think I started just by building out my college list, and I kind of thought about it two ways. One was geography, because I went to a boarding high school in New Hampshire, and it was so cold, and I was like, I got to look at some southern schools, some sunshine. So half my list was actually related to that. And I also remember what mattered to me most was happiness. I literally Googled like the happiest colleges in America, and I added the top 4 or 5 to my list. There was like Yale, there was Vanderbilt, which was super duper happy. So that was something that I paid close attention to. And then lastly, I was really interested in international relations. Well, I should backtrack. I kind of just looked at my activities list and I was like, what can I do with this profile with these ingredients, and I started thinking about, okay, well, I do some student government. I, have learned a few different languages. I've been able to do some cool study abroad programs. Maybe I could craft a little bit of a profile around an interest in diplomacy or international relations. And to be honest, I was really interested in those topics. So then I just started looking at what are some schools with really awesome IR, international relations, global affairs programs, and that's what helped me kind of refine my list. And also just talking to kids who had recently graduated from my school and were now at these colleges. And that's probably one of the best ways you guys can perform research, is just talking to students who currently attend this school, especially folks who were from your high school and have now gone to those schools. But with regards to the process, do you think students should begin? Obviously, there's so many different factors, there's so many ways to approach the admissions process. Do you think students should begin with essays or recommendations, or, just building a list, or how do you usually proceed?
So one other point that I wanted to briefly touch on before, it'll set up this as well, is just truly having maybe a hard conversation, or maybe an uncomfortable conversation, or just the first conversation with your parents or guardians about money and what is a realistic, cost of education for you. I knew growing up, my parents weren't going to pay $100,000 a year for my undergraduate education. So finding places that had, affordable tuition, and really starting there, because particularly to your earlier point, if you're already a person who thinks that maybe you want to go to medical school, do you want to have a ton of student loan debt from undergrad that just compounds when you get to medical school, because that's even more expensive? So I think that's a really good way. So I think you covered this as well, but geography, interests, cost are all a great way of narrowing down schools, because there's thousands of colleges in the country and, even more internationally. And it can be really hard to pick. And I think a lot of students pick based on that sort of name brand, but they're sometimes what is the name brand, or what is the most close college to you in proximity might not be the right fit for you. And so doing a little bit more of the homework to say, well, is this going to be a realistic choice, might be a good place to start. But to the point that you just asked regarding kind of where should you start? Again, it sounds a little homeworky, but I think just doing an honest evaluation of where you currently are, I think is the best place to start. Because if I'm looking at your transcript as a counselor, if you send me your transcript and your resume, there are certain schools that are going to be immediate cutoffs if you're working with, a 25 on the ACT or a, 3.1 weighted GPA. There are just places that no essay is going to overcome, sort of those metrics-based hurdles. So really just looking at what you've already got to work with and starting from there, because you can have your sights set, the dream college. And if statistically it's just unlikely, that might not be a great place. But then really, again, kind of, I think one thing that I always say with my students is what I like to see as a reader, a really competitive admissions office that you have done the homework and thought to get there. So again, I think it's a lot of honest conversations with yourself.
It also depends where you are in your journey. So if you're watching this as a sophomore, obviously your process is going to be very different from a junior, a senior. But I'm assuming a lot of you guys are watching this maybe towards the end of your junior year. And in that case, some good things to start thinking about are recommendations from teachers at your school. You can go and just start staying a bit after class, asking them questions, see if you can get them engaged in some of your other extracurriculars as well. Maybe one of your teachers helps advise a club. That's a good way to begin. Just start thinking about your college list. If you really have no clue, sometimes it's just helpful to take a look at something like the UC Personal Insight questions. So we have so many students from California, and 99% of the time they apply to the UCs. And that's a good way to already start thinking about, what are some different topics that I can address. And at the same time, you might be interested in something like fitness, but to build out your profile, sometimes it could be helpful to start thinking about what can you do in the next 6 months, 12 months to kind of really complete that narrative, I guess you could say. So maybe you teach a physical fitness program. I know Nick and I were having a little bit of a discussion about the rise of passion projects. We're going to talk a little bit about those passion projects, service projects, initiatives, whatever you want to call them. I think that they can be a little bit useful and helpful, but at the same time, they're very case by case. If you're a junior and you really want to study kinesthesiology, sports medicine, it is going to help to show that you have some sort of extracurricular around that. Right. If you don't have that, it might be a good idea to build it. Obviously, if you're able to do it in 9th and 10th grade, that looks amazing. If you do it in 12th grade, 2 or 3 weeks before the deadline, that's going to look a little bit more sus. What do you think about service projects, passion projects? Do you think they're helpful? What are some of the pros and cons?
I think it's a helpful like organizing logic, but I think it can be a really stressful and like damaging component of the application process if it's taken too seriously or too at its face. Like I've worked with dozens of students and read dozens of applications. I don't want to see another nonprofit that you started in your senior year and was active for a month and a half, and then you wrote about in your application that since has a defunct website and is not Googleable, but is still on your resume. That's a waste of everyone's time. I think it can be interesting as sort of as I said, like a thought project of what would I do? Or how can I expand on what I'm already doing? So for instance, I have a student who volunteers at sort of healthcare facility that his brother is a patient at. And so he is very interested in disability advocacy. And so he's just sort of put together a primer for his high school about how to make sure you're actually fulfilling, students' disability waivers and their personal education plans. And so like for me, that is a passion project. Like he's already doing advocacy around a topic that he cares about. Does he need to start a nonprofit that sort of codifies that? Does he need to pass a bill in his state? No. But, it's helpful in terms of thinking about what are you already doing? What are your interests? Where do they lie? And how can you kind of, to your point, connect the dots and present the most like compelling narrative that you can, because that is one of I know you sort of opened with the idea of like red flags and green lights. That is one of the biggest red flags I see of how did you get here? Like I'm reading this essay and I've read other essays and I've looked at your resume and I've looked at your transcript and I know what classes you took and I know what major you've said that you're interested in. None of these things make sense to me. Like I can't connect any of the dots and I should be able to connect the dots.
So just to recap what Nick said, he touched upon quite a few different red flags actually. One is just kind of like a last minute nonprofit. It's not related to any of your other interests. It feels forced. Even that small detail that he mentioned about Googling your site, and then if we see that the site isn't super legit or it's defunct, like admission officers do that. I remember even hearing about one who called UPenn admissions office like professional Googlers. So they will look into what you've done, especially for those service projects, because when we teach service projects, we do think that they're helpful, but again, we try to teach students or coach them to begin them a little bit earlier, and you need what we call kind of like a stamp of legitimacy. So perhaps you get featured in a newspaper, but even beyond like all the features, it's really about the depth of your impact and who you're helping.
The red flag that comes from, we started this because we saw a need in our community. Well, there was already a pre-existing nonprofit or a pre-existing community organization that has, been around for 70 years doing that. Why didn't you just go volunteer there? I can tell you how many essays that I've read that have been like, when I get to XYZ school, I want to start this. And it's like, well, guys, that club already exists. It's existed there for 15 years. Maybe talk about an existing project that they've already done or a regular community event that they do every year.
That's a huge red flag, by the way. So I love to breakdance. I helped run the breakdance club in high school, helped teach some kids. If I were applying to Yale, for example, and I said, I also want to start the breakdance club there, but there's already one that exists and is thriving and vibrant, that really shows that you haven't done your research. That's another big red flag. So really what you guys should be thinking about is, okay, you have already done this. And let's say a similar community exists in college or in your community. The question is, how can you really meaningfully contribute there? Like maybe you do have a nonprofit, but the question is, how are you using what you do here and maybe partnering or, working, collaborating with other groups? That I think is more important than just saying like, oh, I operate here in my own bubble and I'm doing a bunch of great work. They're really interested, in seeing how you contribute to different communities. That's absolutely key.
Tie that into a lot of our other conversation. You don't have to have been in the activity or the, workspace or internship space for a really specific thing to be able to connect other experiences to that thing. For instance, I was in marching band all of high school. I did not go on to be a music performance major. I did not, I'm not a professional musician, but that's time management. That's proven commitment. That's working in a team. That's leadership. That's fundraising at a certain point. We did philanthropies. It's a lot of different skills and a lot of different translational, sort of ethics that you can paint on and map onto, future experiences.
I really like those essays where a student is able to very intelligently maybe talk about 2 or 3 different groups or teams that they're a part of and then unite them through a key thread. that can be done in a Common App essay. Or if you are doing that sort of why this school sort of essay, you can also talk about, I've done marching band here, I want to do something similar in my future school. That's also a really simple but effective way. You'd be shocked at how many students just fail to make that connection.
Or just have anything to say about why they want to go to a particular school. Like I told you, again, offline, but the amount of essays that I've read where people talk about any college campus in the country as being the quintessential college campus, and, students picturing themselves on the quad, and it's like, that's literally almost anywhere. Like, that tells me that you don't know anything about what's happening here. You have no connection to the campus. You have no aspirational connection to the campus. You don't have to have gone to a Division I football game to want to go to a Division I football game. Yeah,
that is another red flag. It's just this kind of like cliche, generic answer that could be applied to 100 different colleges. Right. Well, I guess that begs the question of, how do you break past that? How do you solve that kind of problem?
Yeah, I think when you're applying to college, like, it's not bad to start from that boilerplate, to start from the general essay that, can be applied to everyone, but you want to be tailoring. Like, again, I don't expect high school seniors and, students applying to college to have such a diverse and interesting resume that it's being tailored to each college. Like, so for instance, Common App, you can only have 10 activities. Yeah. If you have 30, you're maybe doing too much. But to sort of like drive down, it's again just thinking about those choices and thinking about what you currently are doing and what you want to be doing and thinking for the future. So I know, I talk a lot about research with my students because I happen to be a researcher and I happen to have a lot of experience in that field. But even just doing the homework of developing research skills and saying, maybe I don't need to participate in, a summer program because maybe it's not cost accessible, or maybe I don't live in that area. And so it would be really unfeasible for me to go to a Yale camp for 8 weeks. But even just looking at, I know about the faculty that are there. And so I'm an undergrad, but maybe I want to be a grad student, 4 years from now. You don't got to bother those people now. But knowing that they're there and then doing work that makes it easier to approach them in 3 to 4 years is only going to make you more competitive. Looking at, again, we talked about clubs, looking at things like job placement. A lot of programs are not shy when they, with their alumni. They'll say,
they want to brag about this.
Yeah, they want to brag. So they'll say, 95% of alumni from this program have been placed in, XYZ job within 2 months of graduation, 6 months of graduation. But looking at where people graduated and saying, X school has a strong track record of placement in this field that I'm really interested in. Yep. Great, cool. Tell me more about why. Talk about a potential program that you think maybe is a contributing factor to that. Like, the conversation that we're having is also being had, by alumni development offices. They're getting alumni in to talk about things that were crucial to their experience, mostly because they want to raise money. But that's also useful for future students.
That's how we get financial aid, guys.
Right? So like when you go to UCLA and you watch the graduate division video about financial aid, like, you'll see my smiling face there talking about what brought me to UCLA. You can go on the website and watch that video and learn about what I think was important when I applied to UCLA.
Honestly, and citing those resources and just saying, like, I watched Nick Havey's video where he talked about XYZ dimension of UCLA. Like, admission officers like that. They pay attention to that. That's simple, low-hanging fruit, because these days there's so many online resources. You can check out so many of these schools even have whole YouTube admission channels that you can look at. You got to really look into the website. Again, job placement afterwards. Like, if you guys want to work in foreign service, then it makes perfect sense to come to Georgetown or GW. Right now we're filming this in DC, as opposed to a school like Brown. Which also begs the question, some students, you can change your major and kind of custom tailor your answer, which you should, for different schools. Even if, for me, for example, when I said that I really was interested in international relations, Yale, they have their fancy name for it. They call it Global Affairs. They have a whole institute. They bring in some really cool diplomats and speakers. So I talked about wanting to engage in that. Versus when I'm applying to Vanderbilt, I think I actually changed it a little bit. So I focus more on creative writing or liberal arts. So of course, that's simple, but it's shocking how many students don't do that. And if you don't do that, you will kind of be penalized because you didn't custom tailor your research. But these days, there's so many resources looking at even things like Instagram. Like a lot of, that's how I found research about the Yale Breakdance Club. And I could see what events that they're hosting. So spending a few hours, we're not talking like, spend dozens of hours researching. Like we're talking a couple, 2-3 hours between now and November 1st or January 1st. It will really, really go a long way. I also think so many students obsess over the Common App. But the supplements are just...
The supplements are just, if not more important. The general Common App essay that you're submitting to everyone, it's important to have it be well-crafted and well-written, but like the smaller answers where you talk about specific, why do I want to go to Brown? What are you going to do here? One big question is always, what are you going to do to contribute to the community?
Exactly.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but my earlier comment about development, like that's something that you can think about now because this is far more true at the graduate and professional student level, but you are an investment that the school is making. You are both paying into it, but they're also paying into you. And if you can show early on, even in the admissions process and the interview process, that you're going to be a reliable student for your program department, or maybe let's say there's an honors college or the general admissions office. If you are a person that they can get to show up to a scholarship dinner or be interviewed for the student newspaper, that's another thing. Read the student newspaper. You think you have a remotely strong interest in going to a school, read the student newspaper because the current students that work there will tell you everything you need to know about what's happening at the school. My current undergrad is currently experiencing a weird financial crisis, and the best reporting that's happening is the student newspaper. If I'm a student going there, or to be honest, if I'm interviewing for a faculty job there, that's where I'm going to get news. And that's really telling me what's happening on campus. And so read the student newspaper.
It's super up to date. And not only that, but you could potentially even reach out to the writers and see if you could talk to them, interview them, just ask them to have a little coffee chat. And that's a great way to get in touch with current students. Even if you ask me, like Yale has changed so much in the last 5 years, like new entire buildings have popped up, new majors have popped up post-COVID. So even if you ask me and you're a computer science major, for instance, I majored in the humanities and East Asian studies. I'm not going to be the best person to talk to. You really want to get someone who is in that program and they'll tell you all the highs and lows and the things they like, and also ask about the things that they don't like to really know if it's going to be a good fit for you. But before we continue, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Quad Education. So Nick is representing Quad. They're a college admissions consulting firm that is dedicated to making higher ed accessible for all, from student athletes to mathletes to everyone in between. And they have more than 15 years of experience, really, really experienced shop, and a team of over 200 counselors. So students who use Quad are 7 times more likely to get accepted to their dream school. And you can also check out their website for a totally free consultation. I'll drop the link in the video, but it's www.quadeducationgroup.com/free-consultation. Pretty straightforward. But again, I'll attach that everywhere. I'll add another comment, but you guys should totally take advantage of that resource. And even just talking to different counselors and figuring out the personality, the style, the way it's done, I think that is going to help only help and aid you guys in this process. It's a little daunting, it's a little scary, but with more help, it will get less daunting and less scary.
Right. And there's a lot of free resources on the website, inclusive of sample personal statements, sample supplement responses. There's a lot of great quizzes on, should I go to Brown? Is that going to be a fit for me for most of the schools that exist? Like Kevin said, you can also scroll through the advisor and counselor profiles and kind of get a good idea of who might be a fit for you, or, who are the people that are doing this sort of work and what might you have to gain from seeking counseling.
So I wanted to touch upon 2 more things, and then I think we'll wrap up this video pretty soon. We've been obsessing over a lot of red flags and things we don't want to see in an application, but I'm curious to know, like, what are some just really stellar, I guess you could call them green flags, green lights? What are some really memorable applications where you've seen students just do something super duper well? Maybe you can offer some examples. Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I probably sound like a broken record, but I'm going to say choices again, just that clear evidence that went into your responses and went into the things that you did. One of my favorite examples in the past year has been really an essay that focused on a student's experience, the choices that they made when it came to working in high school connecting that work to their sort of academic coursework in their high school. They were lucky enough that I think this is happening more and more, and I'm jealous of current high school students, but most of the like gen ed and sort of course requirements are happening in freshman and sophomore years. And then by the time you get to junior or senior, you're kind of just doing what you want. I have a student whose grandparents, live in a memory care facility. Both of them have dementia and, mid-stage Alzheimer's, and they don't have the best memory of who he is. But he has really great memories of them before they moved there, and he is a very passionate musician. And so one thing that he became super interested in was he has a strong interest sort of healthcare, and so he's been volunteering at that memory care facility, just as an aide and helping, registered nurses and the physicians on site. But he's also performing there as a musician and engaging in art therapy with the residents and, reminding these people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when you were in your teens and your 20s, you played the trumpet and you loved it, or you played the violin, and, connecting those people back to, and I don't know how much you know about Alzheimer's, but really what those people remember is their earlier memories. But, he wrote at length about sort of connecting all those dots and just spending that time to cultivate his interests. And that is my favorite. One thing that I will say I think that example is sort of an encapsulation of this idea, but I think a lot of people think that they have to do this trauma mining for the responses of talking about the worst thing that's ever happened to me, or as an XY, but I think a lot of people that are, a combination of, gender and racial ethnic minorities think that they have to talk about that and think that they have to map all of that on to it. One thing, the strongest example that I see is using that in the positive of it might not even have come into play. It might not even have been a thing that you want to talk about. And so don't pressure yourself into talking about it. Yeah. Talk about how you're actually really excited about breakdancing and, using breakdance as a way to connect people in your school or bring communities in that wouldn't have already been connected.
Yeah. Wow. Nick, you've touched upon so many fascinating points and topics. The first thing I wanted to talk about was going back to the memory care facility, the Alzheimer's, the music. So I work with so many students, and I to the point where I think I've seen volunteering at a senior center has almost become like a cliche. But what separates your example from, let's say, students who just show up and perform, play their violin, just kind of to check a box, but they're missing that personal connection, that link. They're missing that engagement, that commitment, the fact that why you, right? Anyone could perform at a nursing center. What really draws you there? Is it the people? Is it something related to maybe the staff, or something that is just connecting you to that place, to those people? That's one thing. The second thing you talked about was the trauma mining, which I also work with a lot of first-gen low-income students. I did Questbridge when I was applying to college. And the challenge there is you just want to make sure that more than half of your story is about how you overcame the situation, not about the situation itself. Right. And like Nick said, you also don't have to talk about it. You could just mention it or put it almost in just report it in the additional information section, and just say that, hey, because of XYZ circumstance, my parents lost their job, I had to switch schools. It doesn't have to be, again, a trauma story, and nor I actually think that's a bit of a red flag. But if done properly, it can turn into a green light. Just like I said, talk more about how you overcame those circumstances as opposed to you suffering from those circumstances.
And that's truly anything of, like I was saying earlier, what skills have you gained from this experience? How are you moving forward to, improve the experiences of those around you? What are you taking from it? And to your earlier point about it's almost become a cliche of, going to check a box, that's everything. I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to that are trying to force their kids to stay in orchestra, and they don't want to stay in orchestra and they don't care about it at all. And their parents are just afraid of well, if they don't stay through it in high school, does it look like they're a quitter? And it's nope, they look like they've reprioritized their time.
Ultimately just hurting you in the long run to stick with something that you're not super duper passionate about or enjoy. It's also going to be so hard to write about that. Next thing you know, you're going to look at your list and there's going to be 3 or 4 things that you just clung on to, but it will be very, very hard to write about it. Versus you could start something totally new and just have a really authentic interest in it, like me with breakdancing, for example. I was lucky enough to join the club or team in 9th grade. I didn't end up writing about breakdancing in my application, although I should have. One of the guys who I met in college said he wrote about it, and that's why he got in. I think he also took like a peek at his admissions file. But those are the kinds of really authentic and memorable experiences that you guys should be sharing and discussing in your applications. But on that note, we'll wrap it up here, and we'll be back in another interview segment, but we'll just pause for a quick break. And thank you guys so much for watching. We really hope you found some value from these free resources. And again, please do not hesitate to check out Quad's free consultations. You guys should definitely take advantage of that. So we'll see you in just another minute in the next video. Thank you guys.